Surprising.
I'm Anthony Wright, and I am your co-host on the Living Conversation with,
Adam Dietz.
and we are talking with Drea, Sober Herbalist. And before the break, Drea, you were talking about moving from one modality into another, and I want to understand, before we began the recording of our show today, you were talking about this idea of wellness. Can you talk to us about that? And then also, you had studied with um, somebody who I had interviewed named Noah Levine. And what a radical guy. You said you were a punk rock girl. And boy, is he a punk rock guy. He wrote the book Dharma Punks. So what's your experience with wellness and with Noah Levine, please?
Yeah, that's actually, I mean, it's funny. You'd think that question would be really difficult to reconcile, but it's not because, like, for many years, Noah used to do workshops, like week-long workshops and so forth, and sometimes longer ones or shorter ones at a place called the Esalen Institute in Big Sur.
Oh, he worked at Esalen.
He didn't work there. He
Or
was
I presented at Esalen.
correct, correct.
Cool.
And that's actually how I accessed him. I was already in recovery for a few months when a friend of mine who was curious about sobriety and was a very like she was very good at like getting a lot of pop culture. She was kind of my person to like, so what's going on? What's the latest stuff? And she hid this book from me at first, and I was like, what is that? Give it to me. And like, here we are, like 34-year-old women, and we're at the beach, and she's hiding her beach read. And I was like, give me
Oh
that.
no.
It's this sober punk rock guy writing the story of the Buddha and the Buddha's enlightenment and journey from the perspective and in the language of like street punk and gangster talk. I was like, give me that. That's like my shit right there. I'm the one who's sober.
That's
And
your
he's
stuff.
edgy.
Yeah.
So that's how I found out about him. And then immediately, of course, I went and got that. And that was his book entitled Against the Stream. Dharma Punks had already been written, and he wrote this other book called Against the Stream, which
Yep.
is all about how, doing following the Buddhist path is going against the stream in the sense that it's easy to just sort of, if you just don't examine anything and you just do what everybody else does or just follow along, then you just kind of flow with everything. And then if you kind of look at everything and sort of challenge yourself at this inquiry and this awareness that it's like suddenly you're going against something, which is kind of like a punk rock mosh pit where there's always one or two people in that pit who decide to go the opposite way and
Mhm.
create this like dissonance, which is part of the creative, destructive, aspect of being a punker, is to say, I'm going to I'm going to rebel, you know? And spirituality is a rebellion, especially in our day and age where it's like everyone kind of shits on it. But anyways, wellness and spirit and Noah Levine and all that. So wellness, Esalen Institute is a very great institution of quote unquote wellness. And I use the word institution because wellness, capital WELLNESS, is an institution, And Esalen is they call themselves the Esalen Institute.
Right.
I
Right.
think they called themselves that in order to sort of like it is a very like masculine, patriarchal, like everyone was scholars and academics and they were very much within the disciplines. And so when they called themselves an institute, I think they were trying to say like, we're of them, but we're not them, which is kind of cool. But
Well, they're going to be carrying forward with a certain structure,
yes.
but not with the same content, obviously.
Yeah, they went about it in pretty radical way. I mean, Hunter S. Thompson was like an
Oh
early,
man.
I
Yeah.
mean, he was hanging out there and
What a
everyone was like,
wacky guy, but he was certainly radical.
but it was a place where, okay, and this is maybe like going to connect to wellness, but it was a place at the Esalen Institute was a place where you could be a scholar and you could be an astronomer, you could be a scientist, you could be a physicist, and you could be a psychologist, and you could be a body worker, and you could be an artist. Like I'm thinking of somebody like Moshe Feldenkrais, who was
Oh
like
yeah.
You know, he was a philosopher, and yet he created this like deeply profound body work,
Yep.
um, this whole like neuromuscular modality that using the word like somatics, which is a huge word in wellness now.
Wow.
So I mean, it's very interesting the interplay. But anyways, wellness is a no, it's just like you were talking about earlier that you're getting an MBA and you're talking about branding, and it's like wellness, you know, in the context of capitalism in the West, you know, unfortunately, it's subject to all of that. But it comes from a very long, thousands and thousands of years tradition of people's daily healing practice because they didn't have a medical industrial complex
Yep.
surrounding.
That's right.
Just had the plants and the tools and their bodies and maybe some food and some substances like oils and plants and things like that. They had very few things, and they were like, well, how do we take care of ourselves? What do we do when we
Right.
get sick? And so that's what wellness originally was just like, what do I do when I get sick? And now it's this like, big industry.
Well, and usually the healers were the shaman and wise women who were on the edge of the community and be there's a term called beyond the pale, and the paling was the fence around the community, but they were out beyond that into the wild and attending and allowing their awareness to be um, blended with the wild.
Yeah, and they were often non-binary.
Yeah,
They
I
were,
didn't know that.
which is very important for people to understand, is that like the biggest, most respected, community of healers were non-binary people. And from the perspective of Ayurveda, we call them two spirit.
Uh-huh.
Because they
Uh-huh.
have this like very pronounced masculine and feminine energy, which is evidenced even on their pulses, because we take two pulses, and it's like there's two different spirits residing within a person. And so they were even like non-binary in the sense that they presented as like masculine, feminine,
Right.
like the
Right.
shape shifting. So they even stood outside of the order of man, woman.
Yeah.
Talk about wild.
Oh boy. And I have a question right now in August of 2025. We are in the midst of a very difficult situation in our country. There is a lot of dis-ease, unease. Do you have any suggestions for our listeners and viewers? And Adam, maybe you might have something too about how do we retain a grounded awareness?
Well, there's so many people out there.
But is there something that's really quite straightforward and simple to do?
Actually, yeah. I'm about to actually go down in September to Eugene, Oregon to do like a video blog for a very famous herbal company called Mountain Rose Herbs, and the marketing people were like, "Can you come down and talk about Ayurveda? Can you talk about lymphatic herbs and this Ayurveda, body work thing that you used to do and that you teach?" And I was like, "Sure." So I think one of the deepest and most profound things that people can actually do right now is to like touch their bodies, to literally like bathe bathe themselves consciously, and to touch. And this has just to do with embodiment,
Mhm.
disconnection from our, you were talking about
Oh,
dis-ease.
yeah,
Dis-ease is also disembodied. And
right.
and I share that from the perspective of someone who was an alcoholic who was trying to disembody and numb because of this disease, right? And it's like anytime we're in a position, and like that's what I did too as an herbalist when I was like, look, I need to make a way here. And politics and patriarchal structures and power relations are trying to prevent me from accessing healing. And I knew what stands out of politics: my body, my senses. And so embodiment to me is a key place for the individual to reconnect with the whole, but also through the physical self. And the Buddha taught that, as far as I understand in my experiences and my teachings, we have this ideas of metta, loving kindness, and the practices of the Brahma Viharas, which have to do with like how we love and practicing love in all these different ways. And like it starts with you, and you cannot change and love and embrace the world if you're not changing and embracing and loving yourself. And so it's like, in my opinion, the first thing you can do is like to lovingly care for your body as much as you can. That's hard for people. There's a lot of trauma that divides us from that task. But we won't change if we don't attempt and we don't become aware of that trauma. At least you become aware of it if you do touch your body and you realize, in the midst of like putting an oil on your arm or putting, a salve on your hands or even massaging your scalp, if you suddenly realize that there's dissonance there, this is hard, or I'm experiencing trauma or whatever, there's all sorts of different possibilities. But I think that's probably one of the biggest profound things that a person can do. It's like, you tune pianos, you've got to listen deeply.
Oh boy.
And when something's out of tune because you're in that listening. And it's like the same thing goes for your body. Like, I know when something's out of tune when I'm like breathing or scrubbing myself or doing massage, or I'm attending to my flesh and my physical needs and my body's processes and my systems. I learn what's out of harmony, but only because I'm listening and I'm spending that moment.
Wow.
Yeah, that's maybe what I would say.
No, this is really great.
And I don't say that from an abstract, I didn't learn that anywhere. I was desperate and I was scared. And a little village healing collective told me to go home. And in the midst of my deep, deep chronic pain and illness, and, just talk about being disembodied in the midst of Lyme disease, it's a horribly painful experience. And they were like, touch yourself, put oil, scrub your body, use this tool. They were like, touch your pain. They were like, go there. And I was like, I'm afraid. And they're like, just try, we'll go with you, and it was like, wow, yeah, this is fucking pain, excuse my language, painful times, but we got to go there. Maybe this is where we start. I don't know. That's how it started for me. That was the revolution, was that I began to touch my pain.
Wow. That's really incredible. I'm sorry that we're at the end of the show here, and we'd like to continue this at another point here. I would love to have you come back. I'm Anthony Wright, and I've been your co-host today with
Adam Dietz. Thanks for stopping.
We have been talking with the Sober Herbalist. You can contact me at my website, theonaut.com, theonaut.com. And Adam, how can people contact you?
Yeah, you guys see right now how awesome it is to expand the conversation. So please do so at deetsadam@gmail.com. And you can also find me at thewaybetween@substack.com. Dietz Adam, Dietz.
And Andrea, how can people, or Drea, excuse me, how can people?
Either one works. I'm at soberherbalist.com. And I just really appreciate both of you. It's a real testimony when you're willing to talk to someone who's just kind of like a real peripheral character. And so I appreciate your questions and your presence.
You're outside the pale. And we're very grateful for that. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.